The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and despair. Bright lights hummed overhead as patients and nurses moved like shadows in the distance. In the middle of it all stood Sophia, a young woman in her late 20s, heavily pregnant, clutching her swollen belly as though shielding the child inside from the cruel world outside. Her silk turquoise dress shimmered faintly under the fluorescent glow, but the trembling of her hands betrayed the storm within. Beside her stood her husband, Alexander Sterling, a man of sharp suits and sharper temper. Known across the city as a millionaire investor, he carried himself with arrogance that dripped into every word he spoke. His reputation for ruthlessness in business often mirrored his treatment of those closest to him. Sophia, once full of dreams and light, had learned that wealth could gild cages but never break them. "Why are you walking so slow?" Alexander hissed under his breath, his jaw clenched as he noticed the curious eyes of nurses passing by. "Do you want everyone to think you're weak? Pathetic?" Sophia winced, her breath short. I'm in pain, Alex. The baby is restless. I just need a moment." He rolled his eyes and tugged at his cufflinks. "Excuses. You're embarrassing me, Sophia. Always dragging me down." A few steps away, Dr. Evelyn Harper, a compassionate physician, glanced at them with concern. Her eyes lingered on Sophia's pale face and the faint bruise near her wrist. Evelyn wanted to step in, but years of working in wealthy hospitals taught her that power often silenced justice. For now, she stayed back, waiting, observing. Suddenly, Alexander's voice rose, loud enough to echo off the sterile walls. "I don't care if you're pregnant. Stop acting like you're the center of the universe." Sophia's eyes welled with tears, her lips trembling. "Please, not here. People are watching." That was when it happened, in one swift, venomous motion. Alexander raised his hand and slapped Sophia across the face. The crack of skin against skin shattered the hushed quiet of the corridor. Nurses froze, a patient gasped, and Dr. Evelyn's jaw dropped in horror. Sophia stumbled, clutching her belly, her back hitting the wall as she tried to steady herself. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Then came a voice, calm, cold, yet carrying the weight of authority that silenced the entire hallway. "That's enough." From behind the crowd, a tall man in a white coat stepped forward. His silver hair gleamed under the hospital lights, his eyes piercing with controlled fury. Dr. Richard Monroe, one of the most respected surgeons in the country, walked toward them. Everyone in the hospital knew his name. What Alexander did not know was that Dr. Monroe wasn't just any doctor. He was Sophia's estranged father, a man she hadn't spoken to in years. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met. The shock of recognition washed over her face. "Father?" Alexander's arrogance faltered for the first time. He looked at the doctor, then back at his wife, confusion hardening into annoyance. "What, your father? You never told me your father worked here." Dr. Monroe's jaw tightened as he stood protectively in front of his daughter. His voice carried the icy tone of restrained rage. "And you never told me you were the kind of man who lays hands on a woman carrying his child." The corridor went silent again. Nurses exchanged nervous glances, waiting to see what would unfold. Sophia clung to her father's sleeve, torn between shame and relief. Alexander straightened his tie, forcing a smirk. "With all due respect, Doctor, this is a private matter. My wife knows her place. Don't involve yourself." Dr. Monroe's eyes burned like steel. "Private matter? When a coward raises his hand against my daughter and my unborn grandchild, it stops being private. It becomes my business. And trust me, young Manu, have just made the gravest mistake of your life." Sophia whispered faintly, "Dad, please, don't. He'll only make it worse." But Richard placed a hand gently over hers, his expression softening for her alone. "Not anymore, Sophia. Not while I'm here." Alexander chuckled, though his voice trembled slightly. "You think your position here gives you power over me? I own half the city. Money talks. And you're just a doctor." Richard stepped closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous calm. "Then you don't know who you're dealing with." Sophia's eyes widened. For years, she had believed her father had abandoned her after her mother's death. She never knew the truth that Richard Monroe was not just a doctor, but a billionaire philanthropist who had chosen to live simply, dedicating his fortune to healing rather than flaunting. But now, that truth was about to come crashing down. On Alexander Sterling, the air in the corridor thickened, the tension electric. Nurses whispered among themselves, sensing that this was no ordinary family dispute, was the beginning of a battle that would expose secrets, shatter egos, and change lives forever. The air hung heavy in the hospital corridor. Alexander adjusted, his cufflinks with exaggerated calm, trying to reclaim the dominance that had slipped from his grip. Sophia, still holding her cheek, shifted closer to her father, her heart torn between fear and fragile hope. Dr. Richard Monroe's gaze never wavered. The same hands that had saved countless lives in the operating room now curled into fists, trembling not with age but with restrained fury. "You say you own half the city?" Richard said slowly, his voice like a blade sharpened on stone. Then, "Tell me, Alexander, what do you own right now? Respect, integrity, or only fear bought with money?" Alexander's smirk widened, though a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. "I own enough to destroy you if you meddle. Do you have any idea who I am?" Dr. Monroe took one deliberate step forward. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Whispers rippled through the gathered staff. Many of them already knew Dr. Richard Monroe wasn't merely their chief surgeon. He was heir to the Monroe legacy. One of the most powerful dynasties in the country, his billions had built hospitals, schools, and shelters. Unlike Alexander, he had earned his reputation not through greed, but through service. Sophia's lips trembled. She had never told Alexander about her father's identity. Years ago, after her mother's death, grief and pride had pulled her away from him. She'd built her life alone, thinking her father had no place for her anymore. And now standing before him, she realized the truth. He had always been watching from the shadows, letting her find her own strength, waiting for the right moment to step back into her life. Alexander let out a scoff, mistaking the silence for weakness. "You may be respected here, doctor, but outside this hospital, I'm the one people fear." "You don't scare me." Richard's expression hardened, his voice lowered, each word heavy with authority. "You should be afraid, Alexander. You struck my daughter while carrying my grandchild. That is not just a crime against her, it's a crime against me. And I do not forgive easily." Sophia tugged at her father's sleeve, her voice breaking. "Dad, please. I can't if you fight him. He'll ruin everything. He controls everything in my life." Richard turned to her, his eyes softening with paternal warmth. "Not anymore, Sophia. You are not his prisoner. You never were." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt the fragile weight of protection, something she thought she'd lost forever. But Alexander wasn't finished. His voice rose, echoing down the hall. "Sophia belongs to me. I paid for her clothes, her jewelry, her home. Without me, she's nothing." The words struck Sophia like daggers, but Richard stepped forward, shielding her with his presence. "She is my daughter," he said, his tone unshakable. "And I'll prove to you and to her that she is worth more than you will ever be." The crowd of nurses and doctors, once hesitant, now murmured in support. For too long, they had seen wealthy men like Alexander treat others as property. But here stood a man who could match him in power and surpass him in dignity. Richard finally turned to a nurse standing nearby. "Get hospital security, now." Alexander's face twisted. "Don't you dare, if you call security." The sentence died in his throat as Richard leaned in close, his eyes burning with quiet fury. "You'll do what? Shout louder? Raise your hand again? Go ahead, Alexander. Show everyone the coward you are. Because when you leave this building, you won't just be facing Mule, be facing the law. The press, and every consequence your arrogance has been shielding you from." Sophia clutched her belly, breathing unevenly. The stress had tightened her chest, and Richard immediately shifted, doctor instincts kicking in. Sophia breathed slowly. "Focus on me." Eyes locked onto his. "Dad, why didn't you ever come back for me? Why now?" The question pierced deeper than any of Alexander's insults. Richard swallowed hard, guilt etched into every line of his face. "Because I thought you hated me for leaving after your mother died. I thought giving you space was what you needed. I was wrong. I should have been here, and I'll never leave you again. Sophia's tears spilled freely. I wanted you. I just didn't know how to reach you. For a fleeting moment, the world around them faded, the corridor, the crowd, even Alexander's seething presence. It was just a father and daughter, reunited under the most painful of circumstances, yet bound again by love. Alexander, however, wasn't about to be silenced. Touching reunion, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. But don't think this changes anything. Sophia is still my wife, and I still control her future. Richard straightened, his shoulders broad and commanding. No, Alex. Alexander, from this moment on, her future is her own. And if you so much as breathe in her direction with harm again, I will personally make sure you lose not only your fortune, but the very name you're so proud of. The corridor erupted in hushed gasps. Security guards finally approached, glancing at Richard for instruction. Escort a slight nod. Escort Mr. Sterling outside. Is not welcome near my daughter until further notice. Alexander's jaw dropped. You can't do this. She's my wife. Sophia's trembling voice rose for the first time, steady and defiant. Not anymore, Alex. You lost the right to call me yours the moment you raised your hand against me and our child. Her words echoed like thunder, and for the first time Alexander's mask cracked. His confidence wavered, his protest swallowed by the strength of the woman he thought he had broken. As security led him away, Alexander's eyes burned with rage, but beneath it was something else, fear. For the first time in his life, he had met someone he could not intimidate, someone who stood taller than his fortune. And Dr. Richard Monroe wasn't finished. Not by far. Outside the hospital, the night swallowed Alexander Sterling like a beast waiting to devour him. The flash of cameras already glimmered at the entrance. Reporters had caught wind of the disturbance. His driver rushed forward, shielding him with an umbrella. But no shield could block the whispers of scandal brewing in the shadows. Inside, Sophia rested in a private ward, surrounded by warmth and silence, at last. Richard sat at her bedside, his hand gently resting over hers. The bruised imprint on her cheek stirred every ounce of guilt in him. Dad, she whispered, her voice weak but determined. I don't know if I can fight him. He's too powerful. Richard's eyes softened. Sophia, power isn't about wealth. Power is about knowing when to stand, even if your knees shake. You've been surviving in his cage for too long. It's time you live free. She turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. But if I leave him, he'll destroy me. He'll take everything. Richard leaned closer, his voice steady, unyielding. Then let him try. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. You're not alone anymore. For the first time in years, Sophia felt a flicker of strength ignite inside her. Meanwhile, in the back of his limousine, Alexander fumed. His pride was cracked, but his ego refused to bleed. That old man thinks he can. Humiliate me? Me? His fists pounded the leather seat. A doctor playing Billionaire. He doesn't know who he just crossed. His lawyer, a slick man with cold eyes, adjusted his tie nervously. Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, this could spiral if the press spins it against you. A domestic violence accusation, especially with her father being him, could ruin your reputation, Alexander snarled. Reputation can be bought. Influence can be bought. I don't lose. Not to her. Not to him. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Get me everything on Richard Monroe. His finances, his connections, his weaknesses. If he wants a war, I'll burn his empire down. At the hospital, Richard stepped out of Sophia's room and was met by his longtime friend and confidant, Charles Everett, senator with just as much clout. You handled yourself well, Richard, Charles said, lowering his voice. But Alexander Sterling is dangerous. He's tied two men who played dirtier than anyone. If he feels cornered, he'll strike back hard. Richard's jaw tightened. Let him. For years I've watched men like him prey on the weak. But he made the mistake of touching my family. He won't walk away from this. Charles studied his old friend. You're prepared to unleash the Monroe legacy again, aren't you? Richard's eyes flickered with steel. I've spent my life healing others, but for Sophia, I'll wield every weapon I have. Later that night, Sophia stirred awake to find her father watching over her. "Dad," she said softly. "What? If this isn't just about me, what if he tries to hurt you too?" Richard smiled faintly, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "Then he'll learn something Alexander Sterling has never understood. Money may buy silence, but it can't buy justice. And it certainly can't buy love." Sophia clutched his hand. "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart," he whispered, pressing her hand to his chest. "But you don't have to be anymore, because this time you have me." The following morning, news broke like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire Sterling accused of assaulting pregnant wife in public hospital, chief confirms. Involvement revealed as victim's father's Sterling empire under fire after domestic violence." Scandal social media exploded. For once, money couldn't buy silence fast enough. Sophia watched the news from her hospital bed, her chest tightening. "He's going to come for me, Dad. He won't let this slide." Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then, let him come. He thinks this is about destroying you. What he doesn't know is that it's about destroying himself."
Sophia's heart raced.
For the first time, she began to believe her father's words. But at that very moment, Alexander sat in his high-rise office, a storm raging inside him. He slammed a glass of whiskey onto his desk, shards scattering across the floor. "They think they've won," he growled. "But I'll remind them no. One humiliates Alexander Sterling, not Sophia, not her self-righteous father." Way, his lawyer, leaned forward cautiously. "What's your plan?" Alexander's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Simple. If she won't stay mine willingly, I'll make sure she has nowhere else to go." The war had only just begun. The night skyline of the city glittered like diamonds scattered across velvet, but inside Alexander Sterling's penthouse, darkness reigned. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a shadow against the city lights, his mind burning with rage. His investigator, a wiry man named Grayson Hale, entered quietly, carrying a leather folder. "I've compiled what you asked for, sir. Everything." On Richard Monroe, Alexander turned, his sharp eyes glinting. And Grayson smirked faintly. The man looked spotless. A decorated surgeon, humanitarian, philanthropist. But every saint has skeletons. I've already dug up whispers from decades ago, suits, enemies in politics, even questionable investments. Nothing confirmed yet, but enough to twist into a scandal. Alexander snatched the folder. "Good. If the world worships him, we'll remind them God's bleed too. I'll ruin his name. Then his daughter will have nothing left but me." Meanwhile, in the Monroe estate, Richard sat at his study. Desk, phone, pressed to his ear. His connections stretched across the city, judges, journalists, political allies, and tonight. He used every one of them. "Charles," he said into the receiver, his voice steady, "we need to be prepared. Alexander won't just lick his wounds. He'll retaliate. And when he does, I want him cornered." His friend Senator Everett's voice rumbled back. "You're playing with fire, Richard. Sterling has allies in the shadows, the kind who don't play by laws." Richard's gaze hardened. "Then we'll drag them into the light. If it costs me my fortune, so be it. But he will never lay a hand on my daughter again." Inside her hospital room, Sophia awoke to a different world. The news channels no longer painted her as Alexander Sterling's elegant wife. Now, she was the brave woman who had suffered at the hands of a tyrant. Messages of support flooded in. Women's rights groups called the hospital, offering legal aid. For the first time, she felt her cage was bending, yet fear still lingered. She stared at her bruised cheek in the mirror, whispering, "Can I really fight him, or will he crush me, like he always has?" A gentle knock broke her thoughts. Nurse Amelia entered, carrying flowers. "From the staff," she said softly, "we want you to know we're with you." Sophia's lips trembled as she accepted the bouquet. The kindness of strangers felt stronger than Alexander's chains. At Sterling Enterprises, chaos brewed. Stockholders panicked as news spread, partnerships threatened withdrawal, and journalists hounded every executive. Alexander stormed into the boardroom, slamming his fist against the table. "Cowards!" he shouted. You think this scandal means anything? Do you know who I am? An elderly board member cleared his throat. With respect, Mr. Sterling, your personal life is bleeding into business. If the Monroe name gains traction, the company could collapse under lawsuits and boycotts. We need damage control, Alexander sneered. Then I'll control it. By the time I'm finished, Richard Monroe will wish he'd never stepped foot. In that hospital, he leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. And Sophia, she'll come crawling back. They always do. Days later, Sophia was discharged from the hospital under heavy protection. Richard insisted she stay at his estate, guarded by men he trusted. Walking through the sprawling hallways, Sophia felt like a child again safe, surrounded by her father's strength. Yet she also felt something deeper stirring inside her. Determination. Dad. She said one evening as they sat in the grand library, I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want you fighting all my battles. I need to learn to stand on my own. Richard studied her, pride flickering in his tired eyes. Sophia, you've already taken the hardest step, he spoke out. But if you truly want to fight, then I'll teach you how. She squeezed his hand. Then teach me, because Alexander isn't just your enemy anymore. It's mine. Back at the Sterling penthouse, Alexander poured himself another drink, muttering as he flipped through Grayson's files. Old lawsuits, rivals, political controversies. Then, one page made him pause. A blurry photo of Richard shaking hands with a government official years ago at a charity fundraiser tied to a controversial deal. Alexander's lips curled into a grin. The game had shifted, and both sides were digging graves. Photos of Richard shaking hands with politicians, blurred documents from decades ago. Half-truths were splashed across the front pages. At the Monroe estate, Richard slammed the paper. Down on the dining table. He moved fast, he muttered. Sophia, pale but composed, picked up the paper. This is all lies. It's twisted lies. Richard exhaled sharply. That's Alexander Sterling. He doesn't fight with fists, he fights with narratives, and the public loves a scandal more than the truth. Sophia's jaw tightened. Then we fight back. Later that day, Richard held a press conference to deny the allegations. Cameras flashed as he stood at the podium, calm but fiery. Dedicated my life to saving lives? These attacks are not just against me, they are against truth itself. I will not be intimidated by the desperate tactics of a man trying to mask his own cruelty. But Alexander had already bought half the reporters in the room. Dr. Monroe, one of them called. What about the offshore accounts linked to your foundation? Can you deny that money was funneled illegally through your charity? Richard froze for the briefest moment. Those accusations are baseless. Every cent is accounted for. Click, 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 click went the cameras. To the world watching, that pause looked like guilt. Alexander, watching live from his penthouse, smirked. Perfect. The seed is planted. But Sophia wasn't about to let her father carry this war alone. That night, she sat in her old bedroom, scrolling through her phone, her eyes burning with determination. She still had contacts in high society women who had whispered to her about Alexander's temper, about the bruises they hid under designer dresses. She began sending messages. You once told me he hurt you too. It's time to stop hiding. We need to bring him down together. At first, silence. Then one by one, replies started appearing. I'll talk. Ah. I thought I was alone. Count me in. He can't control us forever. Sophia's chest tightened with emotion. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerless. Felt like a warrior gathering an army. Meanwhile, Alexander hosted a lavish dinner at his estate, flanked by business allies and politicians. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed, but behind the facade, whispers flowed. Are you sure about this smear campaign, Alexander? If it backfires, he cut the man off with a sharp laugh. It won't. Richard Monroe's halo is already cracked. And as for Sophia, his eyes hardened. She belongs to me, whether she knows it or not. A guest shifted uncomfortably, but the public's sympathy. The women's groups rallying behind her, Alexander's grin was cold. Sympathy doesn't last. Power does. And I will remind her where her power truly comes from me. 2 days later, Sophia walked into the offices of the Herald Tribune, one of the few newspapers not under Sterling's thumb. Cameras followed her, reporters shouted questions, but she walked tall, her bruises fading but still visible a mark of truth. She sat across from journalist Clara Vega, a fierce reporter known for taking down corrupt moguls. "Mrs. Sterling," Clara began, "why now? Why speak out against your husband when you remained silent for so long?" Sophia swallowed hard. Because silence was survival. But silence also made me complicit. My father defended me when Alexander struck me. This isn't just about me anymore, it's about every woman who's been silenced by men like him. I'm ready to fight back. Her words shook the newsroom. By the next morning, headlines shifted. Sophia Sterling speaks out the untold story of abuse. Other women come forward against Alexander Sterling. The tide was turning. Back. At Sterling Enterprises, Alexander raged as he tore the paper in half. Who gave them permission to print this garbage? He roared at his publicist. "Sir, more women are coming forward," she stammered. "If this continues, the board may demand you step down." Alexander's eyes blazed. "Step down? I built this empire with my bare hands. They can't take it from me." But deep down, for the first time, fear gnawed at him. He realized something. He never believed possible Sophia was no longer a pawn. She was becoming his equal in this war, and she had something he didn't single quote. The truth, that night, Sophia sat by her father's side in the Monroe estate garden. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, Sophia." Tears welled in her eyes. "For so long I thought I was broken, but now I feel alive again." Richard looked up at the stars, his voice firm. "This isn't over. Alexander won't go down quietly. But whatever comes, we face it together." Sophia nodded, her voice a whisper, but full of steel. "No more running. No more silence. It ends now." The storm had reached its peak. Alexander Sterling was no longer untouchable. His empire crumbled under the weight of lawsuits, angry shareholders, and women who refused to remain silent. Like a cornered wolf, he grew more dangerous. One late evening, Sophia and Richard were leaving the hospital after visiting recovering patients. Headlights suddenly blazed in the parking lot. A black SUV screeched toward them. "Get back," Richard shouted, pushing Sophia behind him. But before the SUV could reach them, police sirens wailed. A dozen patrol cars boxed the vehicle in, officers rushing with weapons drawn. The driver was dragged out, one of Alexander's hired men. Inside the glove compartment, police found a gun and an envelope stuffed with cash. Richard held Sophia's trembling hand. "He tried to silence you." But Sophia lifted her chin, her voice steady, and he failed. The next day, Alexander himself was arrested. Cameras swarmed the courthouse steps as he was led inside, handcuffed, his once perfect suit rumpled, his face twisted with rage. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with tension. Sophia sat at the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly together. Richard sat behind her, his presence like a shield. The prosecutor's voice rang out. "Alexander Sterling is charged with conspiracy, attempted assault, financial fraud, and spousal abuse. Today, the truth will be heard." Alexander sneered. Across the room, his eyes locked on Sophia. "You think you've won? You're nothing without me?" Sophia's voice shook but grew steadier with each word. "I was nothing because of you. But now I've found myself again, and I won't ever be silenced." The gallery erupted in murmurs, as witness after witness took the stand. Former assistants, abused women, financial experts. The walls of Alexander's empire collapsed. Every hidden crime, every manipulation, every bribe came to light. Finally, it was Sophia's turn for cross-examination. Alexander's defense lawyer smirked. "Mrs. Sterling, if your husband was so cruel, why did you stay with him for years?" asked Sophia. Took a deep breath, her eyes shining. "Because fear is a prison. Because abusers make you believe you can't survive without them. But I did survive. I refused to let fear dictate my life anymore." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge paused, his gavel still. After hours of testimony, the jury returned. The foreman stood. We find the defendant, Alexander Sterling, guilty on all counts. Gasps and cheers erupted. Alexander's face went pale, his hands trembling as the bailiff restrained him. He turned one last time to Sophia, his voice venomous. This isn't over. Sophia met his gaze, calm, resolute. For MIT is. Weeks later, the sun rose over the Monroe estate. Sophia sat in the garden, her baby's tiny kicks, now steady reminders of the life growing inside her. Joined her, carrying tea. The world finally sees Alexander for what he is, said softly. Sophia nodded, her hand on her belly. And soon, my child will be born into a world where fear no longer controls me. She looked at her father, tears glistening. Thank you for standing by me when I had no strength left. Richard's eyes misted. You gave me more purpose than all my years as a surgeon ever did. You reminded me that no matter how dark it gets, love always wins. That evening, Sophia gave her first public speech at a women's empowerment gala, standing on stage under the warm lights. She faced hundreds of survivors who looked at her with hope. Her voice carried through the hall. We are not victims, we are warriors. No amount of money, no empire, no name can silence the truth. My story is only one of many, and together we rise. The audience erupted in applause, tears, and cheers. Richard stood in the front row, his pride visible as his daughter shined brighter than ever. Far away, in a cold prison cell, Alexander Sterling sat alone. The sound of chains clinking as the cell door shut. For the first time in his life, no one bowed to him. No one feared him. His empire was gone. Sophia was free. Sophia, cradling her newborn months later, whispered softly, "You'll never know the darkness I faced, little one. Only the light that came after." Richard placed a gentle hand on the baby's head. A new generation, a new legacy. The camera would fade out on their smiling faces. The baby nestled safely between them, a symbol of survival, strength, and a future built on truth.